and welcome to Module 2. In this module, we'll be looking at self-regulated learning in practice and action. The module is from February 16th to March 1st. It's a 2-week module. So I want to take a moment to review and reflect on Module 1, which you just completed and did your philosophy of self-regulated learning. And I haven't read through them yet because that's my plan after I finish completing this PowerPoint presentation for Module 2. So the idea behind that was to get a sense of what you were thinking about self-regulated learning. Where do you think it's guiding your practice, and really when you think about what you believe it to be, that inspires your practice, or it translates into what you actually do in practice. So what I was trying to do, or the purpose of the assignment, was to look at what you learned and what you were thinking about. There are no sort of wrong answers, it's where you're going. So think of your philosophy as like the beginning first draft document of what you're going to learn from here on in, and how you can go back and reflect on your document and your philosophy and make adjustments and changes, because as a part of self-regulated learning, failure is a big component, and failure is a word that we shy away from in our society because we think failure means that you failed. But in actual fact, you can't learn unless you fail. And you can use a better word that it doesn't sound like failure, because socially we've used that word to mean so many negative things, but it's not. It's the part of how can you construct your classroom so that students are more inclined to take risk and failing and learning from that and moving forward. So that's all a part of the self-regulated learning when it comes to the emotional aspect of learning. And the other, so let's look at the Module 1 was social cognitive theoretical perspective and understanding of SRL. So again, just a quick understanding of what is SRL, what is it all about, but also from a social cognitive theoretical perspective, because learning is so rooted and knowledge is so rooted in social constructs. So you have to think about how the person is socially, let's say, conditioned to learn, which is affecting their cognitive. So that is the part of that. So also discussing approaches of self-regulated learning from a diverse lens that includes Indigenous worldviews of co-collaborative perspective, non-self-agency of SRL. So as you know, most of the Indigenous ways of knowing deals with community, but self-regulated learning is very individualistic. So how do we balance both so that we're not having students feel like they're in a competitive mode, that it's a really self-agency for them, and with a perspective or a vision that is for the better of the community? And I can give you an example. So in an Indigenous community, when one community member grows in a specific area of knowledge, then that knowledge is to help the community get better, not just the person gain more money or get a better job. So it's about how they can use that knowledge and to help the community grow and get better from what it is. A perfect example of that would be something that's situated within environmental issues. So a person that studies biology or geology or something of those along those lines then becomes more knowledgeable to help the community make better choices. So you can see how that is a little bit different than westernized views of individual, get better, get a better job, make more money, buy that gigantic house that everybody dreams of ever owning, and things of that nature. So also exploring the impacts to inform self-regulated learning approaches within the classroom. So let's move to the next slide. So anyway, my final word is I hope that the Module 1 was all of the readings really help you understand a little bit more about self-regulated learning and all the different aspects that it covers. So in a little bit of a nutshell, let's say, by definition, SRL is the strategic pursuit of academic goals that involve control over thoughts, behaviors, and emotions. So this is where the difference comes from self-regulated, SR, self-regulated self-regulation, and self-regulated learning. So self-regulation might be it's a noisy environment, I need to go to a quieter environment. That's a self-regulation, that you understand that your environment needs to change in order to help your learning. But the self-regulated learning part, you've just changed the environment. You self-regulated the environment. What about the learning? What are you learning? You learn something from that, but what are you actually learning when you control that? And I know a lot of you are, and this is the nature of the game when it comes to being in a teacher education program, is you're procrastinating. You're leaving everything to the last minute. And what happens is then you have emotional reactions to that, which is you panic, you feel overwhelmed, then you can't then you're not learning, you're just task completing. And then at the end, what happens? What do you learn? I don't know, maybe nothing. So we're all guilty of that. That's a common response to learning. And that's what I mean by trying to shift the idea of what is learning. What do you think it is? And how do you go about ways of actually learning, that it's not just task completion? And one of the things we'll talk about in the next module is performance zone compared to the learning zone. So again, there's 4 components to self-regulated learning. So there's cognitive, motivation and affect, behavior, and metacognition. So remember, self-regulation is a part of self-regulated learning, but it is not just the only part. So as we move forward and you look at the readings from this week, even though they're minimal, please feel free to go beyond that and expand your knowledge about these 4 components. And I'm going to go in through a little bit now of some of the pitfalls in some of these components. Okay, so I've added my earphones to hope to cancel out some of the noise that's around me, but I just wanted to take a little bit of a longer version of self-regulated learning before we move into the discussion for this module. And that is, and again, this is a very good idea of how to have a sort of a fundamental, let's say, game plan of how to think about self-regulated learning. So it's one's ability to set specific proximal goals for oneself. So for example, and there are distal goals as well. So you have like finish the course, and how do you do your proximal goals is how do you get to each module in between the goals. Select and adopt powerful strategies for attaining the goals. So these are the things that you will intentionally teach your students of how to go about achieving their learning goals. Monitor one's performance selectively for signs of progress. And this is very tricky because it's very hard to monitor your performance. And lots of people then, this is where behavioral issues come in when they fail, they don't feel very well, their self-efficacy gets low, their motivation gets low, but in actual fact, what they need to do with that is to look at it and take, where do I go from here? I haven't arrived yet. So remember, learning is a journey, right? And then the next part, restructure one's physical and social context, your environment, to make it compatible with one's goals. So again, I think of this as like, people that need quiet spaces to learn, and people that need comfortable places to learn. So they're ergonomic, whatever, right? So what are you doing in your environment that makes it great? And so as a teacher candidate and as a teacher, what do you do for your students to help them have the most comfortable learning environment, that not only is it comfortable for them, but also where they feel safe to take risk and fail and learn from it? So the next part then is manage one's time use efficiently. And this is always an ongoing thing. As you know, being a teacher education program, you're constantly juggling things. And how are you doing it? And sometimes you have to keep learning from the things that you're doing. So if it works for you, then great. Some people that procrastinate do their best work when they're under pressure. Other people don't. They feel overwhelmed. So if you are feeling overwhelmed when you leave things to the last minute, then you need to back everything up and say, okay, what can I do that I don't leave things to the last minute? How can I work on things throughout so that I don't have those feelings, and then it compromises your learning? So then the next part is self-evaluate one's methods. And this is really hard because sometimes we don't know what we don't know and we can't see what we are unaware of. So sometimes that's where your role with students is mentoring them and helping them see some of the self-evaluation practices that they can put in place that have helped them move forward in their learning. Attribute causation to results. So what that means is that you know, if I'm doing something and it's leading to my success in achieving my learning, then looking at what caused it, because sometimes it's haphazard, right? So you lose if you leave something to the last minute and you do well and you think, oh, is that reinforcing to keep doing that, or should you look at better ways of trying to do it? And the last one is adapt future methods. So again, as we learn from our unsuccessfulness, then how do we then tweak what we're doing, our methods about going about something in our learning? How do we tweak that? So in all this, what is missing? And this is where I'd like to introduce Indigenous ways of knowing. Sorry, I keep licking my lips here. Hopefully you're not seeing that every time that the camera goes on and off. So this is the First Peoples Principles of Learning. I have the link here so you can access this poster online, and it talks about you know, what it means for as Indigenous ways of knowing, but also of learning. So for example, learning involves recognizing the consequences of one's actions. So I think all of these are very good examples of what you can use for like monitoring or checking what you're doing. Is it helpful? Is it harmful? And all these types of questions that you would be asking yourself. So this is a nice resource for you to keep in mind, especially as you move into teacher education and you're going to be asked questions like this in order to get a job. So really have these points in mind, and then it'll guide your practice as well. Okay, so before you move on to the next couple of slides, just take a few minutes, click the link and watch this video, because I think Dr. Alison Hadwin definitely gives you a little bit of a heads up on self-regulated learning. It's just a quick video, and I think you'll enjoy it. So some of the important components in self-regulated learning you would have reviewed: cognition, thinking processes and strategies, motivation and effect, feelings and beliefs, behaviors, the actions that you take in your learning, and metacognition is monitoring and control, and that's monitoring and control of your cognitive thinking. So this is where hopefully you're starting to see difference between self-regulation and self-regulated learning. So if you've reviewed Alison Haddon's model of self-regulated learning, you see it's circular, right? So it's always about, in the center, you'll notice that there's monitoring, evaluating, and feedback. And these are critical in learning, as you know, and which is why that sometimes I feel very ineffective as your instructor, because you know, especially in asynchronous, there's no kind of human connection going on here. That's the same as a face-to-face. It's really hard. Sometimes people take text messages in like very different kinds of ways. So, and then the feedback, it's really hard to give feedback to one post. It only gives, you know, a one-on-one type thing. So it's really difficult. And, you know, it's hard doing asynchronous. I find it hard doing asynchronous courses, but I also find it even more difficult when it's the subject that requires a little bit more face-to-face. So first of all, what I want to do is look at some of these areas, like understanding tasks. So when you give your students a task, their understanding of it leads to goals and plans. So how do they then, and this leads into what you're going to be looking at, is like setting up self-regulated learning strategies and initiatives in your classroom. So you then, the students then, or together, you set goals and plans of how to achieve the student learning outcomes. So then you begin to apply strategies. So like in math, a lot of people have resulted in using manipulatives because students need more tangible evidence in math because it's such an many abstract concepts. So adapting and regulating. So in other words, as you're trying to achieve your goals and plans and you're applying specific strategies, you're also looking at what's working, what's not working, right? And then you go back to the cycle. So, and the other little square here, it says 6 serious challenges. So these are some of the things that have been known to hinder learning amongst students. Is first, poor task understanding. So they don't really understand the task in the first place. Vague goals and plans. So they just don't, like many of us, we don't know how to set really good goals. And when we set them, goals are meant to be, a working document, let's say. So they change, and they should change. It's not, oh, I didn't meet my goals, so now I'm, going to feel yucky and feel unmotivated, etc. So that's the whole point of trying to transform student learning into it's a self-regulation of learning and what's going right, and always questioning those strategies. So it leads me to the next point, which is weak strategies. So lots of students need to be intentionally taught how to learn, and which means, when you read something, how do you pull out key ideas? How do you pull out key words that are going to trigger your learning? How do you know what you're learning and what you're cognitively forming from the readings is good, is correct? Or is it something that you don't have enough information? How do you know these things? A lack of monitoring. This is really challenging in Ontario schools and classrooms right now when the curriculum is jam-packed. You just feel like you're jumping from one thing to the next. So the monitoring part gets lost. And it's really important. Like, are we here to learn, or are we here to cover a curriculum? And when you cover curriculum, there's no learning in that. Inaccurate self-evaluations. So again, going back to when students fail at something or they're unsuccessful, then they look at it as just being unsuccessful. But what did you learn from that? So the self-evaluation equals I'm a failure, instead of, okay, I didn't quite make the mark this time, but what did I do? What did I do right? What parts can I keep? What parts can I throw away? What do I need to add? So these are the parts that the self-evaluation and learning is not just to shut down. And then, of course, this leads to motivational issues. So we all know when you feel good, you perform well. When you don't feel good, you don't perform well. So how do we keep those motivational issues? And many times students will ask, teachers will ask, how do I motivate my students? And if I wish I had the answer to that, because if I did, I would be telling you. But the motivation to learn is really, sometimes it's very internal. It's extrinsic motivation. There's extrinsic motivation. Some people are just more inclined to be, curious about learning just about any topic, whereas other people need kind of specific topics to be curious. And it's really challenging. And it's especially challenging when you have a curriculum that don't match the interest of your students. So then you've kind of got to find inroads of how to make something in the curriculum more interesting, but still, achieve the student learning outcomes. So really think about how these serious challenges are going to slide into how you can, for example, take the challenge of number 1, poor task understanding. How can you do that so that it reduces that? So looking at all the challenges and working backwards. And that's my best advice that I can give you when you're looking at putting self-regulated learning into a classroom. How do you make the goals and plans more transparent and less vague? How do you make the task more understandable so that your students understand exactly what they need to do? Maybe you need a follow-up. Maybe you need to have them write out the task step by step. And then you see what's missing and what's included and what else needs to be added. So I know this is a bit of a long slide, but it's very important. So hopefully you can take these 6 serious challenges that have been noted from self-regulated learning and its success and work it backwards. So this is some of the, let's say, Zimmerman has put in this self-regulated learning model. And you see the performance phase, self-reflection phase, and the forethought. phase. I mean, it seems pretty simplistic, right? You perform something and then you start looking at self-observations, what you did, imagery, time management, all those things that come into play that we talked about: cognitive, metacognitive, behaviors, emotional. And then you look at the self-reflection phase and you say, okay, what happened? What did I do? And then the forethought phase, task analysis, what went well, what didn't. So it's all a cycle. And I added this in there because even though it's simplistic in the cycle of performance, self-reflection, and forethought, it really is a good model to follow for self-regulated learning. So these are some important processes in self-regulated learning. I know it might sound a little bit redundant now, but hopefully as I repeat it, you'll be nodding your head a little bit more, saying, oh, okay. So control or regulation, which is part of self-regulation rather than self-regulated learning. Individuals attempt to control their behavior. So think of ADHD students who are very hyperactive in their thought process, and they learn some strategies in order to slow their thinking down a little bit. Okay, sometimes they need more frequent breaks in between. So that's control the behavior. The goals: individuals hold goals that represent what they are trying to accomplish. Sometimes we all make goals where we think it's the goal, but really it's not the goal. And then personal agencies, that individual drive and determination to achieve goals together or independently. So these are important processes. So again, you look at control the behavior, set the proper goals, and have the agency, like that self-efficacy that you need, the empowerment to actually believe that you can learn something, that you're learning, that you're progressing, whatever the case may be. And some of our students really struggle with that. They have low self-esteem, or maybe they don't feel as smart as the other children or something. So how can you help them with that? How can you help them build their self-confidence? So these are some of the important processes for self-regulated learning. And as you're thinking about setting up your classroom, think about these things. Okay, so you know that what is learning is a big sort of bone contention for me, because I think a lot of people don't really understand what learning is. And they think that, learning is when you sit, you read, and then you've learned something. But I always think, where's the action, right? So this is an ideal cartoon that really exemplifies the fact that just because you've taught someone does not mean they've learned. So read through this cartoon and really think about that. Think about all the times that you've been taught, but you haven't really learned. So think about, from this cartoon, then what do you think learning is? Continue to probe at that question for yourself. So we are now going into the module 2. Hopefully I just did a little bit of a review for you for module 1, that you got a little bit deeper understanding about regulated learning. And now we're moving into some practices and actions that you could think about and formulate to move forward in your classes, with your knowledge about self-regulated learning and your teaching. So what are some of the strategies that teachers use, or what are some of the setups in classrooms and the mindset and those types of things? So let's move into the readings. First off, you have the student learning outcomes. And for this module, it's really about explain and assess practices that help students develop cognitive, metacognitive, and motivational skills and behaviors that will help enable them to succeed as self-aware, goal-directed, and strategic learners, and to connect this to Ontario Ministry of Education curriculum policies and guidelines and what they say about self-regulated learning. So these are some of the thinking things. Like what are you going to do as a teacher in your strategies to help promote self-regulated learning in your classrooms that will target these areas? And then discussing approaches of SRL from a diverse lens. So again, really, as we move as teachers in Ontario, we always got to be cognizant of the Indigenous worldviews and not just European, Eurocentric, dominating curriculum that we have. So how are we doing this? And this is going to be important for you as the next generation of teachers. And then the last part is exploring this SRL learner, self-aware, goal-directed, and strategic learners. So
Think about the strategies and the things you will do to support your learners in your classroom. Not just learning the knowledge, but learning. So the self-regulated learning piece of this.
So as you read each of the resources, these are the questions to keep in mind that are connected to the student learning objectives. So it is explaining practices that help students develop cognitively, metacognitively, and motivational skills and behaviors. So in essence, you're looking at how can you organize your lessons to foster all self-regulated learning categories. And I'm going to talk about that a little bit more as we go in the next couple of slides. Also, exploring the self-regulated learning learner. So how do you create and intentionally help students become self-regulated learning learners? So are they self-aware, goal-directed, and strategic learners? So what kind of learner are you looking to develop? And I'm sure if any of you, as you know, you've done your practicum or going into practicum for the first time, you really want to make sure that your students are independent, and self-regulated learning can help with that process. And 112, I'll fix that. Discussing the relation of the self-regulated learning to the Ontario Ministry of Education curriculum, policies, and guidelines. So what does the ministry say about self-regulated learning? And that's where you get those connecting resources from the curriculum, which are included in the curriculum right now, which is why this course was actually developed, because it is an important part of the curriculum, yet many of the other courses that you take in the university are not touching on self-regulated learning. So these are the resources for Module 2, and you'll see the beginning resources here, number 1 and 2, are sort of the mandatory readings, and then I have, after this, the connecting of self-regulated learning to the curriculum resource. And this is an area where you really need to explore what it says in the curriculum as a way to guide you as your actions that you're going to take as a teacher. And these are really important when it comes to looking at provincial report cards and assessment reports, and it basically gives you a guideline of what self-regulated learning should look like in classrooms and what you're going to be reporting on. So it's a good way of doing a backward design of what you're looking for and how you're going to conduct your lessons in the classroom. Additional connecting resources, obviously, I've included the Indigenous knowledge and the Aboriginal Education, Ministry of Education, the framework document that's there. So please, if you need some additional connection to the resources of the curriculum or even the mandatory resources, then please take a look at these additional connecting resources.
So I really hope you enjoy this module 2 of 2 weeks of exploring and learning more about self-regulated learning. Please, I encourage you to go beyond the resources that are in this, that are listed, because I just wanted to give you snippets of things. Go beyond, look for strategies, find out what other teachers are using to promote self-regulated learning. Like, there is so much out there, but of course, if I give you too much, you feel overwhelmed, and that's not what I want to do. So I want to just give you a little bit, and then hopefully just to whet your appetite to find more strategies that could be used in the class. So remember, we're not in the setup stage yet. We're just learning about proven strategies, what it would look like, how would you set up your classroom, and then the next module will be thinking about how you can take some of that and move it into practice. As always, anytime that you do a module or whatever, as a good self-regulated learner, you should be thinking about some of the things that you unlearned, okay? Because learning is one thing, but unlearning some of your previously held beliefs and values and relearning is just as important as learning new knowledge. So for the Module 2 activity, I would just like you to not really discuss, but post your answers to these questions. So what practices are discussed to develop self-regulated learning? And it doesn't have to be specific, just practices. For example, setting a safe classroom. What does that look like? The role of feedback in encouraging self-regulated learning. So what are your thoughts about that? What have you learned about feedback thus far? And how can you help students monitor their learning? So what are some of the strategies that, if you had to roll this out tomorrow in your classroom, what would you be telling your students? What would you give them to help their monitoring skills? What are some of the noted challenges and suggestions to overcome them? So these monitoring feedback practices, etc. And how can you work backwards with the identified challenges? And those were in previous slides. And so remember, I told you, like, working backwards through most of the proven strategies of self-regulated learning. How can you work backwards from that? And what approach does the Ontario Ministry take on self-regulated learning? So what are your thoughts on that? And how can you, as a teacher, how can you be a teacher that promotes self-regulated learning in your classroom? And then if you want, you can, again, connect back to those challenges. What do you see yourself doing as a teacher, as a future teacher, that will promote self-regulated learning in your classroom? So again, we're not looking at the actionable parts yet. That's next in module 3. So right now we're just saying, these are the things you would do. These are the kinds of things you're looking at. These are the things that you've noticed and strategies that others have implemented. Okay, so hopefully we'll have lots of ideas shared about these questions in the discussion for this module 2 activity. So everyone, a final thank you. I hope you enjoyed module 2 and are continuously increasing your self-regulated learning knowledge and awareness. And I'm hoping that you're starting to get a little bit of shift in what you're thinking about learning and how you can help your students become self-regulated learners. So thank you, and I look forward to reading your philosophy of self-regulated learning, as well as the moving as activity number 2, module number 2 activity, and moving into module 3 when we get to really put some of these ideas and strategies into practice. Okay, bye everyone.